When you start to learn about Buddhism, you will probably see that Buddhism is very rich and diverse in its sections. Sometimes you see monks eating vegetarian food, but sometimes you see monks eating non-vegetarian food. Perhaps you will wonder why there is such a difference, and which school of Buddhism is right for you. Please watch the entire video below, and you will get the correct answer. Buddhism was founded by Shakyamuni Buddha, more than 2,500 years ago. During the Buddha's lifetime, Buddhism had only one Sangha. However, about 100 years after the Buddha passed away, Buddhism had a split in ideology, so many sects were formed, and divided into two main groups of Buddhist schools. A school of Buddhism was transmitted from India to southern Indian countries, such as Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, so it is called Southern Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism. And another school of Buddhism was transmitted from India to northern Indian countries, such as China, Japan, and Korea, so it is called Northern Buddhism, also known as Mahayana Buddhism. These two schools of Buddhism have in common that they both accept the basic teachings of Buddhism such as the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, impermanence, and non-self, as well as the path of practicing precepts, concentration, and wisdom. However, in terms of precepts and ideology, there are differences. We will go from the overall difference to the details. The overall difference is that Theravada Buddhism advocates conservatism, preserving the precepts and teachings of the Buddha. Mahayana Buddhism advocates improvement, which means changing some Buddhist precepts and ideas to easily integrate with the cultural and social situation in each historical period as well as each country. Regarding the detailed differences, we will learn through the following 8 aspects. Number 1, the goal of practicing Buddhism. Although the common goal of Buddhism is enlightenment and liberation from the cycle of birth and death, there are differences in the practice goals of the two schools of Buddhism. The goal of Theravada Buddhist practice is to liberate oneself, through becoming an arhat and entering nirvana. For Theravada Buddhism, arhat is the highest status. Buddha is also an arhat. The only difference is that the Buddha himself found the path to enlightenment, while other arhats achieved enlightenment through the Buddha's guidance. The goal of Mahayana Buddhist practice is not to liberate oneself, but to save sentient beings from the cycle of birth and death through becoming a bodhisattva. For Mahayana Buddhism, arahantship is not the highest status, but Buddhahood is the highest status. When a person attains arahantship, he will not enter nirvana, but will continue to be reborn as a bodhisattva, and practice the paramithas to save sentient beings. After spending countless lives as a bodhisattva saving sentient beings, the bodhisattva will become a Buddha. Therefore, in Mahayana Buddhism, it is believed that within each of us there is Buddha nature, meaning that each person can become a Buddha, through the bodhisattva path as above. Number 2, concept of nirvana. For Theravada Buddhism, it acknowledges the separate existence of samsara and nirvana. Samsara is suffering. If you want to end suffering and escape the cycle of birth and death, you must enter nirvana. Simply put, Theravada believes that samsara and nirvana are like two separate banks separated by a river of ignorance. One side is the suffering of samsara life, the other side is the ultimate tranquility, nirvana. The Buddha's Dharma is likened to a boat that helps transport Buddhists from the river bank of samsara to the other bank of the river, nirvana. The meaning of the existence of nirvana in the Theravada is only to see the separation from samsara life, and does not mean that nirvana really exists in the worldly sense as a certain realm, because nirvana is unconditioned. However, Mahayana Buddhism does not recognize the separate existence of samsara and nirvana, but believes that samsara or nirvana are just one, all due to our misconceptions. When we realize that we have a self, and are attached to it, that death and rebirth is samsara. But if we realize that all things are the same without any difference, then that is nirvana. To put it simply, for the Mahayana, nirvana is a state of mind, where one realizes the truth that one does not differentiate oneself from all other things in life. Each of us has the same true nature, also known as Buddha nature, and he or she is considered to have attained nirvana. Number 3, about worship. Theravada Buddhism only recognizes Shakyamuni Buddha as the only Buddha in this life, so they only worship Shakyamuni Buddha. Meanwhile, Mahayana Buddhism believes that there exist many different Buddhas. Shakyamuni Buddha is the leader of the religion on earth. There are also other Buddhas such as Amitabha Buddha, the leader of the Western Pure Land, and Medicine Buddha, the leader of the Lapis Lazuli Radiance, and some other famous bodhisattvas such as Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, and Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Therefore, Mahayana Buddhism worships many Buddhas, and bodhisattvas that we often see in Mahayana Buddhist countries, such as China, Japan, and Korea. Number 4. Sutras for Practice and Study. Theravada Buddhism practiced according to Pali Tipitaka, is written in Pali. The Pali Tipitaka has gone through a history of 6 classic compilations and still has almost intact original Pali documents for comparison. Meanwhile, Mahayana Buddhism practices according to the Sanskrit Tripitaka, written in Sanskrit. However, currently the original Sanskrit version is almost no longer available for comparison, but only the Chinese version translated from Sanskrit remains. According to Buddhist research experts, the Pali Tipitaka written in Pali is considered reliable, and closest to the Buddha's original teachings. Number 5. The view of vegetarianism and begging for alms. One of the different views that causes the most controversy among Buddhists is the issue of vegetarianism. According to the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, monastics are required to be vegetarian, while Theravada Buddhists can be vegetarian and eat animal meat. The reason for this difference is related to the overall difference that we mentioned before. Because Theravada Buddhism advocates preserving the Buddha's precepts, they practice the same lifestyle as the Buddha in the past. Regarding food, they do not cook themselves but have to beg for alms, or Buddhists will prepare food to make offerings at the temple. Whatever food Buddhists offer, they will eat. So if Buddhists offer meat and fish, they will still eat it normally, which is why we see Theravada Buddhist monks eating meat and fish. In addition, they only eat one meal a day before 12 noon, after 12 noon they will not eat. Meanwhile, Mahayana Buddhism advocates improvements to easily penetrate the lives of Buddhists and spread Buddhism, so they do not go begging for alms, but cook for themselves at the temple. Because they cook for themselves, they choose vegetarian food to develop compassion, and indirectly contribute to reducing killing. If we are a Buddhist, no matter what school of Buddhism we follow, we should recognize that eating is not the core of Buddhism, but what is important is that we live a moral life and do good deeds, develop wisdom to achieve enlightenment. Therefore, focusing too much on vegetarianism affects the family's eating habits. Or criticizing those who eat meat and fish for not having compassion makes anger grow, which is against the teachings of Buddhism, which is to eliminate greed, anger, and ignorance. Number 6. Practice of monks. Theravada Buddhism mainly practices meditation to achieve tranquility and liberation. Monks often practice anapanasati, mindful breathing meditation, and vipassana, observation meditation, techniques, to develop concentration and awareness. Mahayana Buddhism places great emphasis on rituals, and chanting to accumulate blessings and reduce karma. The most typical of the Mahayana schools of Buddhism is the Pure Land sect, which practices chanting Amitabha Buddha's name, with the belief that when you die, you will be reborn in his western land of bliss. In general, Mahayana Buddhism favors other powers, which means practicing rituals to ask bodhisattvas, and Buddhas for blessings to achieve peace. This is why Mahayana Buddhism is misunderstood as a religion that worships gods like other religions. Meanwhile, Theravada Buddhism focuses on self-reliance, meaning personal practice efforts to achieve peace and liberation. Number 7. Architectural culture and dress. Theravada Buddhism is influenced by Indian culture, so the temple architecture clearly has many similarities with temple architecture in India. Mahayana Buddhism is largely influenced by Chinese culture, so the temple architecture is easily recognizable as having similarities with temple architecture in China. Regarding the monks' costumes, we can easily see the difference between the two schools of Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism uses a cloth wrapped around the body to form a robe, and often expose one shoulder similar to the image of Shakyamuni Buddha we often see. Mahayana Buddhism sews complete robes to wear, and covers the body without revealing one shoulder like Theravada Buddhism. Number 8. Distribution and number of Buddhists in different countries. Theravada Buddhism develops in countries such as Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos. The proportion of the population following Theravada Buddhism in these countries is very high. For example, in Cambodia is 97%, Thailand is 93%. Mahayana Buddhism develops in countries such as China, Japan, Korea. Although the number of Buddhists in these countries is high, the proportion of the Buddhist population in these countries is very low. For example, in China it is only about 18%, in Korea it is 22%. One special thing is that although India is the birthplace of Buddhism, Buddhism only accounts for 0.7% of India's population. In short, if you are a believer familiar with rituals to worship gods, and pray for a happy and peaceful life, you can refer to the practice of Mahayana Buddhism. If you are someone who is familiar with meditation, and wants to self-discover your inner world to achieve peace, you should refer to Theravada Buddhism. In fact, although Buddhist traditions differ in practice, however, the core is still based on us living a moral life, doing good deeds, and developing compassion to have peace in life for ourselves as well as all sentient beings. Thank you for watching the video and wish you a happy and peaceful life.